Hello there, my fellow myth and fantasy nerds. My name is Tanner, and I'd like to welcome you back to my YouTube channel. So, when I was coming up with ideas for this new video, I remembered an old story I used to read when I was a kid that was an adaptation of a Scottish folktale titled The Woman Who Flummoxed the Fairies. So, when that idea came to me, I figured, why not? So for this week's video, as with all of my other myth and legend retellings, linked to the playlist up in the cards and in the description down below, I will be telling you guys this story in my own style, adding my own little creative liberties when and where appropriate, while still keeping the story as close to the original as I possibly can. Now, before we move on, just so we're all aware, flummox is basically just a fun way of saying perplex or bewilder greatly. So as always, please make sure to leave a like on this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe down below. Pretty please! It'll help me make more content for you. And without further ado, allow me to introduce to you the story of the woman who flummoxed the fairies. Once upon a time, in the Highlands of Scotland, there lived a woman who was known across 7 counties as a talented baker. Her oatmeal flatbreads were as good as wheat cakes, her wheat cakes were as good as the finest pastries, and her pastries were like eating a piece of heaven itself. Oof, it's making my mouth water just talking about it. As there was no other baker in the 7 counties who could even compare to her, she definitely made quite the profit from her talent. Every wedding and baby shower for miles commissioned cakes from her, and even the wealthiest aristocrats would give her their money. Now, her prices were more than fair and honest, but she also was not above bartering and haggling with her customers. Oh, she charged a healthy sum for those who were able to afford it, believe you me. However, whenever some poor soul came knocking on her door, begging for a cake and offering what little money they had, she would immediately send them on their way, saying, "You can pay me when the cake is delivered." Then she would bake a cake worthy of a noble lord and give it as a gift to the wedded couple or the parents of the new baby, so that no one ever truly felt left out. She made enough from her paying customers that these moments of charity never affected her finances too much. Now, this woman was not just a talented baker, but she was also a very clever and cunning woman. These details are very important for the rest of the story because, as you will soon hear, her baking skills were what caused her misfortune in the first place, but it was her cleverness that ultimately resolved it. Now, it just so happens that a short walk away from this woman's house, there was a small hill that served as one of the entrances to the land of the Fae. And though the Fae have plenty of their own good food to eat, they do love a piece of mortal cake when they can get some. When they do sneak a piece, they usually will do so under the cover of darkness, when everyone else in the house is asleep. Now, the cakes they preferred over all others were the cakes made by this master baker. Unfortunately, the Fae found that these cakes were difficult to find because every cake she made was just so good Not even a single crumb would be left for the Fae to eat. So, with permission from King Oberon, of course, the Fae sought to kidnap the baker woman and have her bake cakes for them and only for them. Their chance finally came when the woman was invited to bake cakes for a wedding at the nearby castle. As there were hundreds of people invited to this wedding, the woman had to go to the castle kitchen and spend the entire day from sunrise to sunset, baking cake after cake after cake after cake. The Fae learned about this from one of their spies, who was listening at the keyhole, and even when the woman would leave and by which path. So, ever patient as they are, they decided to wait and watch. When night fell and it was time for the baker woman to make her way home, the Fae were hiding near the entrance to the Fae realm, in flowers, under leaves, in the hollows of trees, everywhere they could hide. When she walked by, they started their attack by swarming all around her. "Oh, goodness," she said to herself. "The fireflies are especially numerous tonight." Of course, what she didn't know is that the fireflies were actually fairies, with the light of the moon reflecting off of their wings. The fairies then sprinkled a special powder into the woman's eyes, which started affecting her right away. "Good Lord," she said, with a prodigious yawn. "I feel so sleepy all of a sudden. Must have worn myself out with all that baking. I don't think I can take another step without a quick nap." Saying that, she sat down and rested her head against what she thought was a small hill, but was the secret entrance to the land of the Fae. Once her head hit the small hill, the fairies knew they had her. Of course, the baker woman didn't know all of this until she woke up and discovered she was in the land of the Fae. Considering how clever she was, she immediately recognized that there was really no other place she could be in, and as such, she deduced how she most likely got there. However, she was also clever enough to play dumb about it. "Oh my! I've always wanted to visit the Fey realm ever since I was a little girl, and now here I am." The fairies flew in and escorted her to the throne room, where King Oberon and Queen Titania sat, and they told her that they wanted her to stay with them and bake cakes for them. Of course, the baker woman didn't want to spend the rest of her life baking cakes for her kidnappers, even if they were the Fae. Of course, she was also clever enough to keep those thoughts to herself and to start thinking of a plan to get her out of this mess that she found herself in. "Oh, you poor things," she said to the Fae. "I've baked cakes for everyone back home, and I never even left a single crumb out for you? Well, let's change that at once." She took her apron out of her bag and tied it around her hips. The fairies didn't expect her to be so willing to make cakes for them. They thought for sure she'd act like all the other mortals they kidnapped, kicking, screaming, throwing a tantrum, wanting to go back home to their families, all of that boring stuff. They were pleasantly surprised by her willingness, however, and all their mouths were watering at the thought of her baking a cake for them. Honestly, I don't blame them. My mouth's watering too. The woman looked around her, and then she said to them, "Well, it doesn't look like you have any of the ingredients I'll need to bake you a cake, so I suppose you'll just have to travel to my kitchen and bring back what I need." She soon had her ingredient list, and the king and queen sent some fairies to gather what she needed. Some were sent for flour, some for sugar, some for eggs, some for butter, etc. Soon enough, all her ingredients were gathered, and she asked for a bowl to mix the cake batter in. Unfortunately, the biggest bowl that the fairies could find looked like it would fit in a dollhouse. Of course, the woman said that was way too small for her, so she sent some more fairies out for her big mixing bowl. After that, it was her wooden spoons, then her whisk, then her measuring cups and spoons, one thing after another after another. Soon enough, the fairies' wings could barely hold them aloft, they were so worn out. Finally, the woman got started on the recipe, measuring the ingredients, whisking the eggs, mixing everything together, but soon she paused. You know, it's just not the same without my cat purring at my feet. Bring the cat, Oberon ordered. When the cat was brought in, he curled up right at his mistress's feet and started purring. The woman resumed her mixing, and everything seemed fine for a while, but soon she paused again. You know, I guess I'm just so used to hearing my dog snoring, I just can't get the rhythm of my mixing just right. Bring the dog, came the command, and the fairies brought the dog in. He also curled at his mistress's feet, right next to the cat, and started snoring. The dog snored, the cat purred, the woman mixed the batter, and everything seemed fine for a while, but soon she paused again. You know, I just can't stop thinking about my baby. I've been gone for so long, and he's been cutting in a new tooth this week, and I just can't seem to. Bring the baby, Oberon barked, before the woman could even finish her sentence. Now, the woman secretly knew that her baby would start fussing as soon as he saw her, because he simply refused to let anyone feed him his oatmeal other than his mommy. He didn't even let his daddy give him his food. So, of course, as mommy had been gone for so long, he would probably be quite hungry. So, the baby fussed, the dog snored, the cat purred, the woman mixed the cake, and soon she turned to the fairies and said, "I'm so sorry. I wish I could calm my baby down, but I can't pick him up right now. I might ruin the cake if I stop mixing it. I wish my husband was here. I definitely think he'd be able to." The fairies left before even Oberon could open his mouth. The woman's poor husband wasn't even sure what was happening. What with everything disappearing right in front of his eyes and then being whisked away to the Fey realm himself. And yet, here he was. And here his wife was. And he knew that her clever mind already came up with a plan, so he decided to play along for now. So the woman mixed the batter, the baby fussed, the cat purred, the dog snored, and the husband waited to see what his wife's plan was. You could definitely see that even though they were quiet and somewhat relaxed, the fairies were bothered by the sound of the baby fussing. However, they still waited for their cake with bated breath. Soon, the woman stopped mixing with her wooden spoon and picked up her whisk. She gave the wooden spoon to the baby, who used it to bang on his rocker, fussing all the while. While the baby fussed and the wooden spoon banged and the baker woman whisked, she leaned over to her husband and whispered, "Pinch the dog." "What? Pinch the dog?" The man, understanding this was part of her plan, did exactly as she said. He gave the dog a good strong pinch and kept pinching him, no matter how loud he yelped or how hard he twisted. The dog's yelps added to the banging of the wooden spoon, and the sound of the whisking, and the sound of the baby's fussing. Soon the woman told her husband, "Step on the cat's tail." "Excuse me?" "Step on the cat's tail." The husband obeyed, finally understanding exactly what his wife's plan was. He took his foot and stepped on the cat's tail. Not only did he step on it, he kept stepping on it, no matter how loud the cat screeched like a banshee. So the woman whisked, the baby fussed, the wooden spoon banged, the dog yelped, the cat screeched, and all the sounds came together into a perfectly horrible racket. Every single fairy, including Oberon and Titania, went crazy, flying around in confusion and distress with their hands over their pointed ears. If there's one thing the Fae cannot stand, it is lots and lots of loud noise. And boy, was there a lot of noise throughout the Fae realm that night. Of course, the baker woman was clever enough to know exactly what the Fae liked and disliked. The baker soon took the finished batter and poured it into 2 cake pans. After this, she took her baby in her arms, took the wooden spoon away from him, and then popped a sugar cube into his mouth. This startled the baby enough that he immediately stopped fussing. She then gave a slight nod to her husband, and he immediately stopped pinching the dog and took his foot off of the cat's tail. Soon enough, the only sound to be heard was the flustered fluttering of fairy wings, which soon slowed and then stopped altogether as the fairies dropped to the floor one by one, utterly exhausted. All right, the batter is mixed and in the pans, ready for the oven, the woman said. She then looked around the room and then asked, "Where's the oven?" Every single fairy looked around at their fellows in a panic, and then Titania said in a delicate voice, "There is no oven." "No oven?" the woman asked, in a voice that she hoped sounded sufficiently distressed. "How in the world am I supposed to bake this cake for you if I don't have an oven?" There was no answer. "Well, I suppose you'll just have to take me back home so that I can bake this in my own oven, and then you can bring me back when it's done. Fair enough?" The fairies looked at the woman, her husband, her baby, her cat, and her dog, as well as the wooden spoon and the whisk. They all shivered at the thought. "You're all free to go," Oberon said wearily, "but please don't ask us to take you home. We're all dead tired." "Oh dear, but you simply must have your cake," the woman said to them, suddenly feeling guilty now that they were finally giving her what she wanted. "After all, you all struggled to help me make it. How about this? I'll bring the cake back here after it's baked, and I'll leave it by the entrance that you took me through to get here. Also, how about I bring you a fresh one every Sunday from now on? Deal?" The mere thought of one of the woman's famous cakes brought to them every weekend almost made the fairies forget just how exhausted they were. "We have a deal," Oberon said. "And not only this," Titania added, "but we will leave you sufficient compensation in the same place every Sunday." So the baker picked up her pans filled with cake batter, and her husband tucked the wooden spoon, the whisk, and the mixing bowl under one arm and held the baby in the other arm. Oberon raised his hand, and a doorway to the mortal realm opened up for everyone to walk through. Out the portal and onto the path they went. The baker, her husband, the baby, the dog, and the cat all walked out of the fairy mound and set off down the path back home, never even taking a single glance behind them. When they got back home, the first thing the woman did was put the pans of cake batter in the oven to let them bake. And then she dished out some oatmeal from the pan that was being kept warm over the fire, and taking the baby in her lap, finally gave him his dinner. For a while, there was no sound in the house, other than the whistling of the kettle, the ticking of the clock on the mantel, the dog snoring, and the cat purring. All of these were lovely, quiet sounds. You know, the baker's husband said finally, I really don't think it's fair for the rest of the husbands in the 7 counties that I just so happen to be married to both the most talented baker and the cleverest woman at the same time. Not to mention, they're both the same woman. Well, why don't you trade me in for a more ordinary woman? She said playfully. Oh, please, he smiled back. Why would I trade you in when you're tailor made for me? And that is how the woman flummoxed the Fey folk. And a good thing she did, too, because when the cake she made was baked, cooled, and decorated, the woman brought it to the fairy mound just as she said she would. When she left it there, she saw a small brown bag lying on the ground in front of the mound. She picked up the bag, felt its weight, and then opened it to see what was inside. What she found was a bag full of glittering gold pieces. Week after week after week, both parties kept their end of the deal, with the baker bringing the fairies a cake and the fae giving her a bag of gold as payment. The baker and her family never saw a single fairy again. However, considering the deal was never broken, she and her husband definitely profited from her bargain. So they all lived, as well they should, happily ever after. And there we have it. That was The Woman Who Flummoxed the Fairies. How's that for a fun story? If you liked this video and you want more, please consider leaving a like and subscribing down below so you don't miss any new content from me. Also, if you have any other ideas you want to see in any future videos, please leave your suggestions in the comments down below. Who knows? It might just happen. Alright, well, that's all the time I have for this video, so I'll see y'all next week with some brand new content for you. See you guys then.